So you can head over to the plugins tab and install this plugin over here called Toolit Kit. This kit contains multiple elements and actions that are, or I find myself, very useful in Bubble, that I made for myself, and it's freely available for everybody else in the Bubble community to use. The thing that we're going to be covering today is the hero sizing, but it does include other elements or actions like for each, which iterates over a repeating group. Embed icon, which is the next big release that is currently under testing, and this will allow you to basically embed any icon from any icon package within any element, almost within Bubble. So those buttons don't have icons, you can do that with this element. You want to use feather icons, you can do that with this element. So this is coming in the next couple of weeks. Then we have an advanced input formatter, a couple of events that are attached to these elements, and actions like distance calculations without API, console logs, caching values, list to arrays, and so on and so on. So without further ado, let's get started. So basically, the way the plugin behaves is very simple. So let me come over here, and I'm just going to create a new page called Simple Example. And right off, I'm going to make this page responsive with a full width. And I'm going to come here to the left where the visual elements are, and I'm going to drag the hero sizing element. Now, I'm going to get to this area in a second, the inspector and the options that you have, but for the meantime, I'm just going to create just an identifier with the letter A. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to place this here on the top and add some text here, so I can give you a sense of how this basically works. So yeah, so I'm just going to type in here hello, for example. Maybe I'll even center this, and I'm going to preview the page, and we're going to discuss how the element works in more detail right now. All right, so as soon as you load the page, you'll see that you're greeted with an empty white area, and if you scroll down a bit, you can see hello over here at the bottom. So what's going on? Well, if I come here back to the hero sizing element and I check mark this, keep visible, then what that will allow us to do is it will keep this element visible while we're working on the preview. All right, so immediately what the hero sizing element did is it basically adjusted its height, its container, to match the viewport's height. And this becomes more apparent if we take off the debugging mode, because the debugger adds an extra space at the bottom of the page. And you can see that hello is right there, right under it, right after the viewport's height. Takers off, basically. All right, so that's how it basically works. All it does is it looks at the internal dome area here that Bubble is working with. And it basically changes the height of itself to match the viewport's height or the screen's height. Now, before we go into any more details, I would like just a moment here to kind of cover the architecture or the dome architecture of how Bubble works. So within Bubble, when you add something to the page, you're not actually adding it to the body of the page. What Bubble does is it actually adds another div or another so-called group, which calls itself the main page. So you're not actually, anytime that you're adding an element within the page here, you're not actually interacting with the body directly. It's actually all encompassed within an extra div in there, which they call the main page, the Bubble element page. And within that, Bubble then starts creating these R lines and R boxes. And the difference between them are, the R lines don't contain any width information usually, while the R boxes contain width information. And the way the Bubble handles this is it handles this very statically. So what I mean by this is, when you're talking about CSS and CSS changes within the DOM or within the document, Usually if I want to achieve a a div height of 100% of the viewport, all I got to do is come in there and say something like 100 VH. And that immediately signifies to the browser that this group over here has 100 VH in terms of height, 100 viewport height. That's what the VH stands for, 100% of the viewport height. What the hero sizing element does is, after it draws itself, it measures the viewport height, and then internally calls on Bubble to adjust its height to match that height. Now, since the element here, the hero sizing element, is within the framework of Bubble, that forces the rest of the elements within Bubble to kind of resize themselves so that they can take into account the new height. And that is one of the pitfalls, I think, within the Bubble ecosystem here. And I hope in the future they can move away from these R boxes and R lines. Although that can prove quite difficult, because other platforms allow you to kind of build grids in 1x1 patterns, or 1x2, or 1x3, and so on, while Bubble just allows you to drag and drop in there. But I hope it's a limitation they can overcome in the future, which will open up a lot of things that we can do and experiment with. So that's a simple example of how it works. But what can you do with it? Well, I have here a client app, been-there.travel, and here we use the hero sizing element to create a chat screen that fits the mobile height of the page. And if you actually drag this, you can see that it actually changes its height dynamically to fit the viewport's height, right? Another thing is you can create complex logic within this to achieve something like this. So this is created in Bubble. You can access it via this link. And this is a recreation of a Nike page that was on Pinterest. And I thought it was very interesting because, for example, this text here on the bottom, Nike, has to stay always to the bottom of the page. And these social icons have to do the same thing. And if you take this and drag it, you can see that it's adjusting its height dynamically as the viewport height changes with it. So in this page, actually, we have multiple hero sizing elements working together to kind of achieve this effect. And if I go here under the showcase and I just drag it over here for you, you can see that we have one here. I know the colors changed a bit. This is using the older version, but it still works well. So we have one here, another one here, and another one here to kind of achieve this effect. And if we turn off this responsiveness here and we scroll down, you can see that this actually cuts off at the viewport height, where the rest of the text or the images or the content that you want to display is available underneath it. So how do we build something like this? Well, let's first explore a bit longer how you can center this text here, and what are some of the things that you should watch out for when you're using this. So let's start by describing how the minimum height that you should work with. So whenever you're designing a page, you should keep in mind that there is a minimum height that you can't go beyond. So when you're designing something like this, it actually looks like this, right? So the whole chat window is actually confined within this small area over here. It doesn't even include this top section, which is a conversation list. These are the messages. So defining or working with the absolute minimum height allows you to actually be more responsive when you're taking this design across to different platforms or different devices. Because if I design this from the get-go to be this high, then that is my absolute minimum height that I'm working with. So to keep everything working the way it should, you should actually design while taking in consideration an absolute minimum height that the hero sizing element won't be able to shrink past. So coming back here to our example, you can see that this currently has a height of 120 pixels. But when we viewed it, okay, it's actually stretched itself way beyond that. So This is true, this minimum height is true when you're dealing with non-hero sizing elements. So when you're dealing with groups, chats, text, images, there is a minimum height consideration that you've got to keep in mind. But when you're actually manipulating this object over here, this element, this plugin, then it doesn't really have a minimum height. Although you put a 120 in here, this will be able to stretch down its height to 0. It will not be able to go to a negative, but 0 is its absolute limit. So what does that mean? Well, all right, so I'm gonna change the height here to 5 pixels to kind of demonstrate where I'm going with this. And you can see it's all the way up here. All right, again to 5, and I'm gonna drag this hero over here, and I'm actually gonna shrink the page size all the way to the absolute minimum that we can put it. And if I reload this page again, then the exact same effect happens. This stretches itself. Hero is right there at the bottom. Let me hide this. Hero, hello is right here at the bottom, but the page is not expandable anymore because that's a minimum height that you're working with, right? So let's imagine here for a second that I want to center this hello text. So how do I achieve this? Well, in the simplest sense, what you can do is you can actually keep this at 1 pixel or 5 pixel. You can drag hello over here. You can even drag your page all the way to the top. And you can come here and you can adjust the offset to 50%. And what that will do is it will allow the hero sizing element to recalculate its height to 50% of the actual viewport's height. So we centered basically, or essentially we centered this text in the middle of the page, right? So on to more complex designs. I was looking at Pinterest a couple of minutes ago, and I thought it would be interesting if we can do a design similar to a Pinterest page. So this is what I have in mind. So what we can see here right off the bat, examining this design, is this here, this section over here appears to be a hero image that engulfs the whole viewport, and some additional details about products here at the bottom. So how do we do this? Well, let me get rid of what I have over here. And you know what? I'm gonna stay on this page, and then I'll move on to the other pages later. And we'll start examining the inspector and the options that are available within the hero sizing element. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna drag a group here onto the page, and here is a decision that you need to take, your design decision. What is the absolute minimum height that you can work with when you want to design something like this, right? So I'm just going to say 500 pixels. And there is no right and wrong while you're doing this, but it's a trial and error that you have to actually go through to find out how much you can optimize this page. I'm going to remove the style, and I'm going to add an image. Maybe I'll search for a free image, and we can just pull up anything from here. This bike looks nice, so we're going to take that and toss it right in there. We're going to center the image, and I'm going to make it as wide as the parent element, which is the page, and I'll just keep this crop selection on. So basically, if I load this now, it's going to look like how it appears over here, which is exactly what we expect, right? So how do I stretch this? Well, what you can do is you can actually take a hero sizing element and you can just pop it inside. And since it's inside this group, then it will stretch this group along with it. So if I put an identifier here again, I'll say here hero, and I will not work with an offset, and I'll just center this horizontally, and I reload the page again. What you can see is it'll actually stretch the whole group that's holding this image all the way down to fill the viewport's height. So yeah, seems simple enough when you're dealing with one object. But what about this? This is a little bit more complex. You can see here there's a title that is, I don't know, about 10% of the viewport's height, and then another gap over here, and another gap over here. Well, you can do that too. So if I take this and shrink it down to, let's say, around 20 pixels, I can begin to add a title here, So I can say something like my title, and let me switch this to a heading 1. Do you know what? Let me select a darker image or a lighter image so that we can see what we're doing. All right, great. So I'm going to center that. And again, it's very important to work with minimum heights while you're doing this. And it's very important too that each element that's interacting with this hero sizing element is actually, how can I say this, clipped or almost touching or clipped on right on the edge of the element on top of it. So how do I work with this? Well, okay, so let's examine this to kind of achieve this effect that we're looking for over here. Okay, so let's examine the inspector. So first thing you'll notice is here under identifier is basically the ID of this element here. And what I mean by ID is not actually the ID in the DOM that's represented in the DOM here that you can actually relate to. It's just an identifier to keep this one unique. And we're using this identifier to actually make use of CSS variables when we're designing more complex things like chats. So that is what this identifier is. Then there's the offset in, and you can decide the offset in pixels or in percentage. And what this basically does is it actually minuses or reduces the height of the hero sizing element depending on the offset that you input over here. So for example, my screen's height is, let's say, 1000 pixels. If I put here 100, then this element, the hero sizing element or the hero element, will actually become 900. So 1000 total viewport height minus 100 is 900. And you can also, you can also do this in percentage. So I can say, for example, I want to offset this by 70%. You can also offset by other elements' IDs. What this means is, for example, if we have another text here, which is some description, and we give this element an ID. Let me expose here my IDs. There we go. And we give this an ID of, I don't know, 1. Then I can mention this ID right now in here. And what the element does is it reads the current height of this and adjusts its own height by the height of this. So you kind of have that flexibility. Another thing we can do is we can match a height. So we can match the height of an element on the page to the height of this element over here. And you can just mention mention its ID over here. So if I say 1 and I give this a border so we can see the effect, and I load the page, you know what, let's keep this visible on the page so we can see it. You can see that the height of this text box matches the height of this here. And that kind of opens up more possibilities for you. What about full page maps, for example? How many times did you want a map to be the full height of the page? Well, you can do that with this option over here. All right, so let's continue on with our example. I kind of tempered off a little bit into another area. I'm going to include here some text. So that's for example, best shopping site ever. And I'm going to make this heading 3, center this. Maybe I would want to add a button here that says start shopping. That's my call to action right there. And yeah, let's just end it over here. All right, let's load this right now to see how it behaves and kind of explain what's happening over here. All right, you will notice that when this element stretched, it pushed everything under it down. The height between the elements is still maintained, so we're not touching that. The element doesn't interfere with that, or however that is done. If we want to actually control this distance here between these two elements, what we can do is we can add another hero element here, stretch it, give it another identifier, let's say number 2, and then we can set off another offset in here to kind of control the height between the my title and this text over here. Okay, so when we load that again, I didn't set it to visible, but you know what? Let me reduce it so you can actually see the effect and make it visible, and reload that again. All right, there we go. So what happened here is it got pushed down. What about if we want to move it up? What about if we want to center this? Well, this is where it gets interesting, and this is where the trial and error comes in until you kind of get your design. Unfortunately, we can't see the previews happen on the editor in real time due to the limitations of the plugin ecosystem. But what we can do is we can make a best guess. So right now we start this off with this value. I'm going to reduce that. So I'm going to come here, I'm going to say this, keep this at 90%, give this I don't know, a 60% height, and let's reduce this down. Let's get another hero element in there. Let's center that. Let's keep that visible. I'm going to call this 3, and I'm going to give it another percentage here. Let's say another 50%. And these should work together essentially to kind of give you the effect that you want to reach. So let's load this off and optimize it so it's displaying properly. So okay, so we can immediately see that we're almost there. We got it. This needs adjustment, so this is in the middle. This needs a bit of adjustment, so we can bring this back up. So let's put that at 70% there. Let's put that at, let me look at that again. Yeah, let's put that at 70% also. And reload the page. Stretch this further down. So I'm going to go with 50. There we go. And yeah, it's almost there. I don't want to waste everybody's time kind of getting the percentages right, but it will also accept decimal percentages in here. So if you set something like 55.5, it will also accept that, and it will adjust the page height accordingly. So there we go. I think we got it. So that is how you achieve an effect like that. Does anybody have any questions until this point? Feel free to chat. If you guys with each other post some questions on the chat, I'll be happy to answer them and pick them up. Again, you can, of course, speak directly into the presentation and ask your question. That shouldn't be a problem too. All right, let's head over to something more interesting like maps. Okay, so I got a page here that's empty, that's ready to receive a map. So let's imagine a design here where the map is on the right and the current listings that we want to display are on the left. How would we achieve something like this? And I do have a project currently for a customer that kind of has this running for him, and I can show you that in just a second. It's loading on the other screen. But essentially what we will do is we will actually add a map to the right side of the screen and have that map, for example, at 50% of the page's width. So let's say 600 pixels because the page is 1200. And we can add another group here on the right to hold our repeating group that will hold our listings. So I'm going to stretch this all the way here, add my repeating group. I don't have any data objects yet. Let's add one. So let's call this simply locations. And here I'm going to say geolocation and have this as a geographical address. And let's populate this with a couple of dummy lists here. So for example, I'll type here Toronto, and I'll add another one for, and maybe New York. Oh, that didn't work. There we go. All right, that should be enough. So what I'm going to load here is my locations. I'm going to do a search for them. and I'm going to show them over here. I'm going to keep this as a vertically scrolling list, and the height, the minimum height I'm going to work with, well, let's keep this again at 500 pixels. All right, so here we go. There's no predefined styles in there, but that's all right. I'm not going to worry about too much about the design and the looks of it. But what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to add the formatted address so we can take a look at our results. All right. While I'm doing that, I'm going to reduce the page's height. And I'm going to start off by adding a hero element all the way over here to the right of the page. Actually, sorry, I'm going to add one here, all the way here inside this group, so I can stretch the group holding all of these details to the full page's height. Now again, this could be as big as you want, but watch out in responsive design. Sometimes what Bubble does is it will actually, when a page is compressed in terms of width on a mobile device, it will actually take this element and toss it under the other elements, and you're kind of thinking what's going on there, what's happening, why isn't this working? It is working, but it's just positioned in the wrong place. So make sure you test this out with responsiveness to kind of figure out, is it sitting in the right place or is it not sitting in the right place? Okay. That's good there. That's good there. I'm just making sure everything works. The page loaded, so here's the page. You can see that this is a full viewport of the height. We were planning to add something else under there, but essentially it loads. And this is what effect you can achieve with this. All right. So I'm going to give this an identifier here. I'm going to call this left, because it sits on the left. You can call it anything you like. And if I preview the page now, what will happen is one of two things. You know what? I'm going to keep this visible again so we can view what's going on. All right. Take away the debugger because it adjusts the page's height. And you can see that the page, there's no scroll bar. The page is, this group is actually adjusted to the full screen's height. Okay, so how do I apply this to the map? Well, what you can do is you can add an ID to this called map. You can come here to responsive to the hero sizing, and you can say match the height with the map. And that should work. There we go. Now the map is the full page's height. Now what about this repeating group? I know, this is everybody's pain, the repeating group. How do I adjust this to be the full page's height? Well, unfortunately you can, but it requires a bit of CSS tinkering, 1 or 2 lines to kind of get it right. The hero sizing element will only take you so far until the repeating group actually starts misbehaving while you're using it, and you require a bit of CSS to get it in there. It's not difficult to do. I'll show you how to do it. We can actually do it together. But to actually make this better, so I'm going to make this, I'm going to keep this to 2. What I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the height of the repeating group in there. Kind of center this. I'm going to give this a border. And the reason I'm doing this is because I don't have many data points in there. I only have 3. We can add a couple more to make it more interesting. Let's say Paris. Let's add, I don't know, Dubai. Let's get rid of that. Let's add, I don't know, what do you guys want to add? You can just type anything and let the geocoding do its magic, kind of getting some fake addresses in there. It doesn't matter as long as we have something to display, right? Okay, I think that should be enough. All right, next thing we're going to do is, that's a good one. Somebody wants to add Disneyland next time. So what we're going to do is we're going to add an ID to this group so we can actually target it within our CSS if we need to. So I'm going to call this RG as in repeating group. and I'm going to come here and I'm going to show you what happens if you just add RG in here directly. All right, so you can see that the repeating group's height adjusted itself the way we wanted it to. But what's happening is Bubble attaches the scroll event in JavaScript to this repeating group to load data on demand as you scroll, because it's a vertically repeating group. Another way to solve this is to say, okay, I don't want to deal with this vertically repeating group. I can do a full list, or I can do an externally scrolling list, and I can do some other CSS tricks in there to kind of get this working, but we want to really work with this. So you can see that Bubble loaded, here we have it set as 2 rows, but what Bubble did is it loaded these 2 rows and loaded one more for good measure, kind of prefetching or anticipating that the user will scroll down this repeating group. So how do I handle something like this? Well, for sure you can. So in this, for example, in this chat demonstration, it is a vertically repeating group that scrolls within itself. But what you need to do is you actually need to tell Bubble to start the scrolling. So you need to come here on page load and kind of trick Bubble when the page is loaded to actually scroll down or scroll to an entry or anything similar. So we can say scroll to this repeating group. We're going to do the same search. We don't need anything here. And we're going to say, for example, last item. And what that should do is it should allow for the scroll bar to kind of come into existence. And there you go, it came into existence. The page is formatted properly and the data is loaded. Now what I've seen others do is they kind of scroll to the 3rd or 4th one, knowing that they have only 2 to begin with, and scroll back up right away in the same workflow to kind of enable the scrolling bar to come in. So that is one thing you can do. Another thing you can do is actually you can leave this as a full list, and you can introduce a scroll bar within the group holding this repeating group. So let's see how that looks like. So here under the full list, what will happen is the page's height got adjusted because it's trying to load the whole list. So if you come here to the DOM and kind of inspect the DOM to see what's going on in here, and you select this repeating group, you can see that this repeating group is actually, its height is greater than the page's height that we want to work with. So how to do that? Well, you can select this group over here, you can come here to its height, and you can say 100 VH, right? So that changed the page's height to the group's height. Then you can actually add, you know what, I'm going too fast. If I'm going too fast, I apologize. Let me start all over on this point so it'll make sense a little bit more. So what's happening here is, since this group is trying to load the full list, it's stretching everything underneath it. So it's stretching the group that's holding it, and it's stretching the page that's within it. So what you need to do is, if we want to introduce a scroll bar right inside this group, we would want to change the heights of the group that's holding the repeating group and the group or the page itself. To do that, we actually need to add IDs to them so we're able to target them. So what we can do is we can say RG holder here, and to the page we can add an ID also called page. And we can come here to our hero sizing element, and we can say match the height for the RG holder and match the height for the page. And what that will give you is it will give you a repeating group that you can't scroll within. Then here comes the CSS trick. The CSS trick here is to go back to the group you want the scroll bar to appear in and add here to it. Sorry, this is not the right one. I'm looking for the right one with the right ID. Yeah, here it is. And kind of come here and say overflow auto. Oh, I missed that. Overflow Y auto. There we go. So there's the scroll bar within that repeating group. and you can tinker around with this to kind of find the right fit. But how to add this so that it permanently sticks within the application? There's two ways of doing this. The first way is to come back to this page over here and add your styles in here. The second way is the second method is the method I prefer, is to add an HTML element and add my CSS directly within that HTML element. So you can come here and go to your HTML editor, add your style tag, which is very simple to do. This is your style tag. Then we want to target by ID, so we can say RG holder. You can open a bracket and have our overflow here. Make sure you set it to important because Bubble will reset that for sure, will overwrite that, and hit save. And then when I come back here, I don't have to reapply that trick. Just a second, somebody has a question in here. So you're essentially saying that you need to stop the repeating group from stretching down using the hero element. Yes, so yes, that's essentially what I'm saying. So in this example we're working with right now, I changed from a vertical scrolling to a full list. So I'm basically changing the CSS of the group that's holding this RG to kind of leave everything hidden until it shows itself, right? Until it's available. In the other example, within the vertical scrolling, that is not needed because we are matching the height here, okay, for the RG. So it's being stretched, but all we got to do is initialize the scroll bar activation using the workflow here. That's essentially what I'm saying. Okay, great. Let's move on to another example. Does anybody have any questions about this right now? All right, great. I don't see any questions. So we're going to move on to the next example, and we're going to create something more complex with this. Okay. So let's talk about a chat. Everybody loves, everybody loves a good chat. Now, the best way to do this is to kind of have two different experiences between desktop and mobile views. And the reason I'm saying this is because if you take a look at this example over here that we have for this client, this experience here is optimized for mobile, but if I took this away, then we have another experience that is customized for desktop. And the reason we're doing this is we don't want to show our user just basically a huge page that is just a repeating group in there with a lot of empty space and so on and so on, trying to make it usable or UI friendly or UX friendly. So usually you have to do this in two different experiences. So what I'm going to do here in this example is I'm going to create a full page chat. And if you know how to do that, then you can definitely do the mobile optimized view of that easily. It's actually much simpler than a full page desktop chat. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to create on the right here a conversation list, and on the left a conversation list, and on the right which are our actual messages that we need to display. And I'm going to begin this journey by actually heading over to the database and creating two new custom data types. The first one being the conversation, and another one being the messages or the chats. All right, great. So in this conversation, I'm gonna give it some default fields that everybody expects to be within the conversation. The first one being the participants. And this is a list of things. This is my naming convention. Everybody has his own. I add an LT when it's a list of things. I add an FT when it's a foreign thing. So a list of things and a list of participants, which are the users. Then I'm going to add last message, so I can show that last message date when it was sent. And I'm going to add also in here a notification. And the notification is basically saying which users I need to notify. All right, great. And inside here, I'm going to add my actual messages, which is another list of things. Great. In the message area here, we're going to have the actual message. We're going to say sent by, who sent that. And we just need to relate back to the conversation. You don't need to do that. I like to do that just in case I'm referring to a specific message and I need to head back to the conversation. Most people don't do it, but I do it. And that is my foreign thing here. All right, great. We're going to start this off with just a default data set. Maybe I can do a couple of fake emails here. So I'm going to say test@test.com. That is my first user. And I'm going to add another user here called hello@test.com again. And basically those are the participants that are going to be in chat. Now I'm going to start a new conversation, so when we start designing, we don't start off with a blank page. So I'm going to say, I'm going to leave this empty. I don't care about that right now. But what I'm going to do here in the list of participants is I'm going to add my test, and I'm going to add my hello. All right, great. Okay. We're going to leave messages empty for the time being, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. All right, I'm going to run as right now as one of the users, so I don't have to do this later on. So I have another question for Marcus here. It says, does it work with externally vertical scrolling? Yes, it does. What you actually have to do is you have to treat it as a full page, as a full list, and just rely on Bubble to load that information when somebody scrolls down that list. All right, so I'm gonna increase the page to a full width. What I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna add a group to hold my conversations here on the left. So I'm gonna make this about 400 pixels wide, and I'm gonna call this conversations. And in my conversations, I'm gonna have another repeating, I'm gonna have a repeating group in there to hold my conversations. So I'm just gonna leave a bit of space here on the left. Stretch this and keep this at vertical scrolling for maybe 2 items like we did in the other example. And I'm going to add, you know what, I'm going to add a title to that conversation so we can see it. Yeah, so I'm going to come here back to data types, add a title in there. And the title can be something like, I don't know, first name of the first user, a first participant, comma, first name of the second participant. It can be whatever we want it to be, right? Or if this is, for example, for support tickets, it could be the ticket number, support ticket number, so and so. You know what? Let's just do that. Let's just say support ticket number 1. Okay. So I'm going to load the conversations in here. I know everybody. This is the easy bit. Nobody wants to see this, but we're doing it anyways. All right, so here's the conversation title. I'm going to copy that over. I'm going to say here the last message, and I'm going to format this as something like that for the time being. I'm going to put all of this in a group so we can make it clickable. Maybe make it a little bit bigger. Design is not the objective here. Again, minimum heights. I say that's about good. We want to leave that space in there. All right, I'm going to make this bigger, but I will stretch it. I will reduce the height. I just need a little bit more area to work with for the upcoming bit. All right. I'm just looking over my notes. 1 second, please. Okay. Now I'm going to add another group here on the right. This is going to hold my messages. Let's keep it this high, and we'll reduce it in a minute. And I'm going to stretch this all the way to the left. Here we're actually going to load the messages that are coming in from the conversation. So I'm going to have this group over here accept a conversation without a data source. And when somebody clicks here, that data source is sent there. So let me just tie that in. So I'm going to say display data in the group messages, which is the current sales conversation. So now we have that data coming in. What we can do is then we can use our repeating group here to pull that information or pull those messages from there. Let's do it like that. So we're looking for messages that are coming from the parent group's conversation messages, and we can sort this. We can definitely sort this the way we want it to be sorted. Yeah, so I'm not sorting this as descending, and I'm not going to use for this example anything like list shifter or reverse repeating groups or anything like that. I honestly find for most applications you don't need that. My biggest pain with those plugins are that everything has to be loaded in the browser for it to be actually reversed, so it doesn't happen on the server side. And when a conversation has a lot of messages, it becomes very heavy to work with, and it slows down the page speeds and creates this this pause in loading that is really a pain. There are other strategies to manage chats with a lot of messages in them. Let's say you have a couple of thousand messages between two users. What you can do is you can actually, instead of pulling out the messages from a data source, you can actually do a search for, and you can select a minimum date to pull from. This way you only pull the last 30 messages, and when he scrolls all the way to the top, you can show him a button that says load more, just like Skype does, and when he clicks that, minimum date gets adjusted by another 2 or 3 days to show the next batch of messages that are on top of that. So that is one strategy I used in the past to do that. All right, for the purpose of saving, I really want to save as much time as possible so we can get to other things. So what I'm going to do here, instead of designing everything, is I'm actually going to make use and copy a couple of examples that I have from other works that I did. So inside this conversation here, we're receiving messages. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use this field over here, or this group over here, to show the messages that are from me, and I'm going to use a similar one for the conversations that are to me, and I'll show you how to tie those in just a second. So what we're going to do is we're going to put this all the way up to the top, and this accepts the message and accepts the current sales message. Now this group over here is transparent, it doesn't have anything in it. But what we did is we actually added the background color to the actual text visual element here, not the group. And I did that on purpose because what we can do is we can use another plugin like Classify to actually introduce CSS, so we kind of get that nice width adjustments on the text depending on the text size and how wide it is. Okay, so no problem, Paul, you're welcome anytime. All right, so let's select here, just change this really quickly. Let's just say body, sorry, wrong button. Let's just change this here to Arial because I don't have that font in there. And let's just take the other one here, which is from the other. So the first group on the top in green is from me, and this gray box over here is from other participants. So again, this takes messages. I'm gonna select another font here, Arial, and I'm gonna start attaching, or it's already attached, but I'm gonna add a class in here. And if you don't know how to use the Classify plugin, then what you do is you come here to plugins, add a new plugin, search for Classify. And what Classify does essentially is it allows you to add classes to your DOM elements inside Bubble. So the way you add a class is you select the element, and inside the ID attribute here, it uses JSON notation. You can actually add class and message from me, and that class will be applied to that element. So when we load up that page, we probably don't have any messages in there. You know what, let's add one as a quick example here. Let's change the search field on here to the title, and let's say support ticket 1, and say hello, so you guys can kind of see that. And I'm going to change this again to the actual message so I can find it when I'm attaching it here. There we go. All right. Okay, so here's hello. So classify, we added the class to the element, but we didn't tell it what to do with that class. So if I examine this right now, what you will be able to see is it added a class from other as we specified. So message from others as we specified and told it to do within our design over here. So class message from others. Okay, so how do we make this, the width of this adjust to the text size? Well, I have a cool little snippet that I did earlier, which I'm happy to share with you guys, with anyone. By the way, this whole app over here will be available for everybody to access, and I will share the links directly to your emails after this meeting is completed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an HTML element here, and I'm going to paste those custom CSS variables and styles in there. They're very simple. I'll go over them in 1 second after I paste them. Okay, so here we go. So all we need is actually this. We don't need anything else. So what is basically happening here is, since we added a class to those to those elements over here showing the message, we can start attaching CSS to that class. And some of you might say, okay, we can do that with an ID, but actually you can't do that with an ID, because the ID of an element has to be unique. And since this is a repeating group, and this ID is going to repeat itself over and over and over again, what's going to happen is those styles will be applied to the first element it finds in the DOM, in the object that matches the ID, and it's going to ignore the rest. But if you attach a class to it, then you can actually attach CSS that's going to be reused across multiple messages or multiple DOM elements safely. So what we're basically doing here is we're making the position of this box, of this text box, relative. We're saying the width fit content, so it's always looking at the width of the text inside that text element and adjusting its width. And we're going to float from me to the right, and we're going to float from others to the left. And that is all what we're doing. It's very simple to do. Now, after we added that, if we reload the page, what you'll begin to see is this width is actually changed its size to fit the text over here. And even if we come back and add something longer than this, so if I go back to the database and say, come back to messages and edit this and kind of add, I don't know, something in there, then what's going to happen is going to adjust this width accordingly. Okay, so we still have a bit to go. We have another 35 minutes left, and we should be done this example by the end of those 35 minutes. So, all right, so we got that down. We know now these are the groups that hold the messages here and there. Now we're going to put in our rules. So basically what we're going to say is, if the current cell message, and when I copied this over, it came with it, but when the current cell message sent by, okay, is the current user, then this element is visible because it's sent from me. But if it's not me, then hide it. On the other side, on the flip side here, we have it's not me, make it visible. And what that will allow us to do is kind of show and hide accordingly, depending on who sent the message. We're going to do some height adjustment here. We're just going to leave a bit of spacing so the messages don't appear crammed. And what we're going to do here is we're going to say separator none, and that's it. That we basically got that down to the place where we wanted it to be. After this, I'm going to add another group here so we can start typing in our messages. So maybe something like this. And I'm gonna say here, I don't know, new message. Can be anything you guys want. And I'm gonna add, not a multi-line, but a single text. You can use a multi-line if you want. It's up to you. And I'm gonna add a send button over here. And I'm gonna call that send. And I'm gonna call this message. So the workflow here is very simple. This is gonna take the conversation from its parent element, which is this one, which takes the conversation from the list of conversations that we passed on. Then when we hit send, all we're gonna do is we're gonna create a new message, and it's gonna take it from the input message, and it's gonna be sent by the current user, and it's gonna have the parent group conversation attached to it. Now in my case, because I'm relating conversation also back, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make changes to the conversation, and I'm gonna add that message to the list. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna reset the inputs. That's it. So that will allow us to start typing in and start accepting messages in there. So let's say, I don't know, what's up? Send, there's what's up. All right, so how do we stretch this? Okay, the first thing we gotta keep in mind is, right now, the way we're dealing with this is, we want this whole group that's holding the repeating group and the message under it. Let me make this gray so it'll be easier to see on the page. Yeah, there we go. We want to stretch the whole group holding this to the page's height. That's the first thing we gotta accomplish. Second thing we gotta accomplish is we gotta reactivate the scroll bar that's here. Third thing is we gotta watch out for the height of this element over here, because we need to offset the height of the hero sizing element by this element over here. So I'm going to move this group all the way to the top. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a hero sizing element over here to the right. I'm going to move it all the way to the corner. You don't have to, but I want to. I'm going to call this messages. And we're going to come back to the conversations in a few minutes. We're going to call this messages, and we're going to give this an ID over here, the new message, and we're just going to call it new message, new dash message. And we're going to tell hero over here to offset by new message. So move this here. Stretch this down a bit. There we go. I'm just going to keep it centered like that. And we're going to load the page and see how that worked out for us. All right. So when we click here, great, the group is stretched, but the RG isn't stretched. That's fine. But there's a couple of things you should watch out for while you're doing this. First thing is, we can't match the RG's height directly to this element over here. And reason being is, see those small gaps on the top, on each corner? This is gonna affect our end result. So if we just do this blindly and give this an ID here and tell hero message, match the height of the repeating group message, what we're gonna end up with, although it might seem fine, what we're going to end up with is we're going to end up with a badly designed page. This extra space at the bottom is because I have space, by the way, here at the bottom. But we're going to end up with a badly designed page. Why? Well, take a look here. See what's happening here to the scroll bar? It is not actually being configured properly. The RG is not being configured properly in terms of its height, because we didn't take into account that small gap on the top here that we had. And you might say to yourself, okay, but you know what, I can design an RG that'll have no gaps. Well, in reality is, you really can't, because because the minimum height here is dictated by what you have inside this cell. And so you can't really do that, right? Because you want to leave some space between the messages, and you want to leave some space on the top and bottom so it doesn't appear cramped, right? So how are we going to do this? Well, we're going to make use of something called a CSS variable. And what a CSS variable essentially is a string, it's a text that's attached to the browser that can be reused over and over again within our CSS to kind of achieve what we want it to achieve. So how do we determine this variable? Well, since we already have this RG here on the right, it already passes a variable for us inside of the browser. And if you come here to the message, it says here, this plugin appends and regularly updates a CSS variable. And this CSS variable is called hero vh the identifier that you put over here. And you can actually see this at work if we add the ID of this repeating group here again. So if we add match my height here again, and we reload this page, you can actually examine it, and you'll see that what the plugin actually did is it added this variable here. It actually used the variable it added to adjust the repeating group's height. But we don't want that. We want to be able to customize this a little bit. So a good starting off point is to actually make a copy of this, because this already targets the right element, so it takes a lot of the guessing work right out of it, right? So that's one thing you're going to do. So I'm going to highlight this and copy it. Another thing we're going to do is we're going to determine what is a safe height for us, and we're going to click right in here, and we're going to say calc for calculation, and we're going to open a bracket. Okay, and we're going to keep this var exactly as it appears, but we're going to put a space and minus, and we're going to offset this by a number of pixels. All right, great. So I offset it right now by 10. You won't be able to see the changes, but watch as I increase this offset how the scroll bar changes its height. And this is basically what we're trying to achieve. So we're looking for something along here. So let's say 21 pixels. Then you can leave that in, copy that, come back here, remove the match my height, because we want to add a custom variable now. Come back to the HTML element that's holding your CSS styles, and just drop that right in there and hit save. Now when we reload again, you can see that it's properly adjusted to its height. Now we have one more thing to do, which is activating the scroll bar inside this list, and then we can move on to the conversation list, which by the way looks exactly the same as we did on the messages. It's just on the other side. It's on the flip side here to the left. So let's activate that scroll bar. So we're going to say here when he clicks, when he displays data, what we're going to do is we're going to scroll to entry, and we're going to scroll this messages to the current sales conversation, messages, last item. And we can even animate this. And what this should do is should activate the scroll bar. It won't work right now because we only have 2 messages in there, but that's how it works. So now when we enter something new and hit enter, let's add a couple in there. It takes a second for, oh yeah, I didn't add that scroll here again. I should add it here again, sorry guys. So it can update itself. So scroll to the last item, which is the results of this creation. Sorry about that, missed that one. Just click there again. There we go. Take me a second, I know my screen size is quite high. There we go. There's a scrolling bar in action. So if we reload this again and we want to see the scroll bar activation, there we go, it's activated. Now of course we can make this look prettier. We can move this off to the left a little bit so the scroll bar doesn't hide it. And let's move on to the conversation part of this. All right, so the conversation part will look the same. You can reuse this over here, but it's not a good idea because this is offset by this. But you can definitely do that if you want to keep the same offset on the same on both sides. What I'm going to do here for the purpose, for the sake of simplicity, is I'm going to add another one over there, another hero element over there. So where are you? Here we go. Let's drag that in there. All right. So I'm going to work now. My new minimum height is this. So I'm going to stretch that down. I'll probably increase that by another row or maybe by 4 rows. You know what? I'm going to give this a border so we know where it sits on the page. So it'll be easier to work with. There we go. We're done there. All I got to do is offset the height of this element, the plugin, by the height of this HTML, because the HTML does have a height. So the height is 25. So I'm going to come here and say conversation. And I'm going to offset this by 25. And I'm just going to match this height directly. So I'm going to give this an ID. I'm going to call this conv. Come back here and say conv. All right. Now the activation of this scroll bar is very simple. It's on page load. So when the page is loaded, then I'm going to say scroll to entry, conversation, again the conversation, the do search for, conversation, and the last item. All right. There we go. So that's it. All you got to do is just style this the way you want. Yes, there's a couple of spaces here and there, but those are responsive designs. Everybody knows how to do that, adjusting widths and so on and formulas until they get that right. But that's it. Now if I just close off the page now, so you can see the full page design. There we go. This is our full page design. No scroll bars on the pages. Nobody can scroll anywhere. It works the way it should. Aside from a couple of width changes, everything is as we expected. All right. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, great. Does anybody have anything else that you want to see? This is sort of a question and answer. I can answer your questions, and maybe if you have a couple of designs in mind that you're having problem with, maybe we can take a look at them together for a few minutes, see how you can approach that. Please feel free to ask as many questions as you like. Okay, so if there aren't any questions in there, that's it for this training. Thank you for attending. And I hope to see you in the next one. Yes, I will provide a link to the recording. What I ask you to do is please drop me off a request if you guys would like that, because I am not going to make this recording available to everybody on YouTube right away, probably in several months or so. So here's my email. Please send me a message or drop me a message via email telling me that you would like this recording, and I will be able to send you this recording unedited. Yes, you can place, somebody's asking, can you place the hero element behind the RG? Yes, you can definitely do that, but keep in mind that the RG element itself is taking up space on the page. It actually exists on the page. So when you start compressing the width of the page, see it sits right there. When you start compressing the width of the page, Bubble might actually toss that element that's behind the RG under the RG or over the RG. So that could create a problem for you there. An easy way to find out if that's happening is just keep this visible while you are designing your page, and this way you'll be able to see if that happens or not. Any other questions, guys? Okay, great. So if you do drop me off an email for a request, I will be able to also share this URL with you for this page, for this app, so you can come back to it. I'll be able to also provide you with a link to the showcase, which has a more complex example with this Nike that you can also take a look at and make use of inside your designs. And yeah. All right, guys. So thank you very much for attending. It's been a blast. And see you guys all soon. Have a great day, everyone.